This video is brought to you by jadedpainting.ca.
Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of my in-depth review of the new Badger paints. Minitaire specifically is the name of the line. And this is part 2, and as I mentioned in my last one, part 2 will be all about the metallics, such as this one. Ooh. As I mentioned in my previous video, Minitaire, so Badger has created 5 different metallic paints for the Minitaire line. 2 silvers, 2 golds, and a brass. And they're pretty nice. And these were some of the paints that I was very excited to see, because as you may know, airbrushing with metallic paints can be quite difficult. Because what happens is it tends to lose the shine and becomes a very dull coat when you use metallics through an airbrush. And that's why I use such products as glaze mediums in airbrushing, is to give that shine back to the model when you're spraying it. So I was very excited to see these metallic paints, and seeing 5 of them, that's really nice. If you want to see my part 1, go to part 1 of my review and check out what I think of overall the line. But this one will be just about the metallics, as I just mentioned. So I decided to take these 5 paints and put them to the test using, of course, a Badger airbrush such as this one. This is the Patriot 105. I actually used my chrome for it. I wanted to test it out using a slightly smaller nozzle. And yeah, and so I put them to the test, and let's see what happens.
And so to test these metallic paints, I decided to use black primed Necron warriors, since I figured what army would be better suited to test out metallic paints than an entirely metallic army. And I typically go over black primer because it produces the best sheen, so I figured best color to try. So one by one I took all of these paints and gave them a very good shake, such as gun alloy, antique gold, noble gold, and brass monkey. I gave them all a very good shake, and one by one I put them into my Badger chrome airbrush, such as this chrome silver, and I applied it in as even of a coat as possible to the Necron warrior. And as you can see, the paints are very thin, especially these chrome colors, the silvers especially. As you can see on this chrome silver being applied to the Necron warrior, the coat is very inconsistent after a single coat. And so I also tried gun alloy and applying it in the same thing. The paint was very, very thin, a little too thin. And what it did was it built up in certain areas and pooled in those areas and did not give complete coverage to the entire miniature with a single coat. But the key is with these metallic paints is to let them dry entirely and see how the sheen follows at the end, because they can produce a very nice metallic color at the end. And same with this noble gold, it was very watery. This one was by far the thinnest and was the hardest to cover the black primed miniature. And then I tested with antique gold, and antique gold was actually pretty good. The consistency was nice, and it actually gave a pretty nice coverage and a nice color after a single application, which as you can see here, it actually is going over pretty evenly over the miniature. And then I tried this over with brass monkey, and brass monkey gave by far the nicest results. A very quick coat, as you can see, gave really nice coverage over the miniature. Then as I mentioned, the next step is to let them all dry. I wanted to give them all dry and then to show what happened. Here are the results. As you can see with chrome silver and with gun alloy, there is a lot of pooling, and noble gold was by far the worst. It was too thin and it gave very inconsistent coverage, versus antique gold and brass monkey, which gave relatively really nice coverage after a single application. But I figured you might want to try giving 2 coats and see how it appears after 2 coats, so I repeated this process once again. And here are the results. So we'll start off with the colors that I found to be great. As I mentioned in the previous step, the 2 that were really nice were antique gold and brass monkey. Both of them produced excellent coverage and a great appearance after a single application, and 2 coats just made them better. And as you can see by the back here, there's really no pooling. It was a great coat and produced awesome results. Next are my results that I found to be good, but could definitely be improved upon. And these were consisting of the 2 silvers, chrome and gun alloy. though it did produce a pretty nice result in the end after 2 coats. As you can see in the back, the coats were just too thin, the paint was too thin, and it provided a really uneven paint coverage over the miniature. It tended to pool in the shoulder areas, and on the legs you'll see there's a really big, vast difference between the bottom of the leg and the top of the leg for the amount of coverage they received. As you can see, there's a lot of areas that are just not being very well covered with the paint, and it was because it was too thin, ultimately. So to be improved upon, it will have to be a little bit more thicker and a more consistent coverage with an application of this paint. And then finally, the not so good. And unfortunately, I found one to be not so good, and it was the Noble Gold. After 2 coats over the black primer, this paint unfortunately fell very short. It was way too thin. As you can see by the coverage on the back, it was just much too thin. It pooled in certain areas. The coat was not very consistent at all, and did not give very good coverage at all, though it did produce a nice shine.
As you can see, the results of my test were kind of all over the place. There were 2 paints that were really nice. I really liked Brass Monkey and the Antique Gold. They produced great results. Antique Gold kind of required a second coat to accomplish this though, but the Brass Monkey was awesome. It went over quickly, gave great coverage. But the biggest problem I had was with the silvers and the other gold, that really yellow gold. The 2 silvers I found, they were a little bit too watery. A little bit too thin, sorry, not watery, thin for my liking. And that's why you saw those inconsistent spray patterns. And I also found that when I was spraying with my airbrush, that it would go and then a little bit, and then a little bit. And I did give them a very good shake ahead of time. I don't know if I showed that, but it was a very good shaking ahead of time to try to get as consistent of a paint flow as possible into my airbrush. But I did find that the consistency was a little bit too thin for my liking. Now, even after a second coat, it did improve greatly. I do have to say that the overall appearance, but still, there were still several spots which you could see that had inconsistent paint coverage. So would I recommend these if you're painting such as a Necron army? Perhaps. It will give it a more, I guess, worn appearance because it won't be perfectly uniform over the miniature. But yeah, I personally would recommend, I guess Badger would just need to fine tune slightly the consistency of the silvers. They make it a little bit thicker and a little less thin. I think that would be greatly improve the 2 silvers. They're called Gun Alloy and the other one is called Chrome, I believe. And yeah, that's my recommendation to Badger. If you're out there and watching this, I definitely recommend making them a little bit thicker and a little more consistent of a consistency. You know, because even after shaking, I finally, as I said, just in some parts, and then it just would not spray very well in my airbrush after that. But yeah, and then there of course was that other gold, the really yellow gold color, which I found the consistency to be way too thin. Now I did give it a difficult test. I went over a black primer, but that's what I typically do with my metallics. But as you can see, it was very inconsistent coverage over that miniature, and it did not go over the color whatsoever over the black primer. So for that particular one, I definitely recommend improving the consistency. So overall, out of the 5 metallics, I really like 2 of them. 2 of them were okay, but definitely needed to be more thicker of a consistency. They were a bit too thin. And then 1 of them was really way too thin. But I definitely recommend giving them a check for yourself. You can go check them out at www.minitaire.com, I believe. If not, the website will be at the end of this review. And I really hope you appreciated this review. Please like the video, comment in the comment section down below, and subscribe to my channel if you already haven't done so. It really does help a lot. And stay tuned for part 3 of my in-depth review, where I will be going over what I think are going to be a lot of fun in this line, the ghost tints, the candies. I'm super excited to use these. They look like they're going to be a lot of fun and produce some really cool effects on miniatures in future videos. So thank you very much for watching. And until next time, this is Jay saying, happy painting, everyone.